Mount Cranmore. The snowmaking pond, they have found what appears to be a body in the pond.
It's with great sorrow that I tell you that we located the body today of Krista Dittmeyer.
A black hearse winding its way back to the snowmaking pond that has been at the center of a large-scale investigation.
And the ambulance responded to Mount Cranmore snowmaking pond. They found what appears to be a body in the pond.
This is the pond that has been the focus for dive teams and crime scene experts all day.
We are taking your calls for those of you just joining us. Who murdered 20-year-old Krista Dittmeyer? In the hours just before we go to air, we learn her body has been found submerged in a retention pond. It's a pond the ski resort used to create snow when they needed it. Just a quarter mile, a stone's throw really, away from her abandoned black Nissan. In that Nissan, the killer left alone her 14-month-old baby girl, Aaliyah. We are taking your calls, but first, I want to go to Dr. Janice Amatuzio. Doctor, thank you for being with us. Dr. Amatuzio is the former chief medical examiner. Oh, thank you. And author of Forever Ours. Doctor, can you tell from taking the body out of the water how long the body had been in the water?
Here's what we can tell from the information we have now. First of all, the identification was made at the scene. It was made prior to going to the morgue. This indicates to me that there were sufficient visual characteristics. In other words, the facial features were well enough preserved to have made a positive identification. This is not surprising due to the fact that the body had been, in all likelihood, submerged in this cold water, or at least exposed to cold air for a period of 5 or 6 days. The second thing that we know for certain is that there was sufficient blood, whether in amount or pattern, in the vehicle that police right away suspected foul play. It wasn't as though there was a small cut on the finger or something like that. But those are the two things that I think we can say right here and now. Number one, the body's well preserved enough to have been able, for the investigators to have been able to make a positive identification right there at the scene. They didn't have to go and wait for dental records or DNA or fingerprints. They made it right then and there. And secondly, there must have been something in that blood pattern in the vehicle that caused those good investigators to say, this is foul play.
Dr. Janice Amatuzio with us. Thank you for helping me with your name, doctor. Joining us from Red Wing tonight, author of Forever Yours, former chief medical examiner, forensic pathologist. Doctor, would the cold temperature of the water affect the decomposition of her body, and if so, how?
The cold water would have preserved the body. The cold water would have slowed all the processes down. And earlier you asked if the body had been floating or on the floor of this pond. In all likelihood, they found it on the floor of the pond. The body has to start breaking down, and in the process forming gases in order to allow it to rise to the surface. That would not have been the case in this condition. The body would have been very well preserved.
Dr. Amatuzio, when you say forming gases, you mean inside the body, the decomposition creates gases like rotting food or any type of decomposer. It lets off gas, but it's contained in the body, which swells the body, and the body will then rise up.
That's exactly right. We're all mammals, and all of our tissues do behave the same.
Joining us out of Red Wing.
Decomposition.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I said when the decomposition process is allowed, in other words, when enough warmth and time have passed by, the processes will begin. But when the body is placed in a cold and wet environment, all of those processes are slowed down.
Dr. Amatuzio, another question. They're not saying cause of death, but I think that sources would have leaked it if they could tell it immediately, such as a stabbing or a gunshot wound. That leads me to think it's either strangulation, possibly ligature or manual, or asphyxiation. Will they be able to determine the cause of death, even though her body had likely been in water since the time she went missing?
I suspect because there was blood in the vehicle that she's going to have some sort of wound or some sort of trauma. I would say that we need to allow the forensic pathologist the time to work, the time to give that meticulous attention to detail, allow them to make this decision. You are very right, Nancy, that many times with young women in particular, asphyxia, manual strangulation, some sort of sexually motivated crime would be more common. But at this point, that would just simply be speculation.
Out to Michael Gass, president of National Academy of Police Diving, joining us out of Miami. Michael, again, thank you for being with us. You're one of the most renowned divers in this country. How would the search for her with divers had taken place in a retention pond like this?
Well, depending on the size of the retention pond and the depth, they would just set up a systematic way of covering the bottom. And a body is something large enough that would be found readily, quickly. The matter would be, how it was laying on the bottom, how it was recovered, how it was preserved. You've got to remember that the diver's job is just to be an extension of the investigator. So he's got to collect all that information as he's making that recovery and report back to the investigator and follow his cue or her cue as far as, what they want done. And then there's the evidentiary process afterwards once the body is removed.
Unleash your lawyers, Daniel Horowitz, San Francisco, Alan Ripka, New York. Daniel, the fact that the killer likely left the little baby strapped in a car seat alone for God only knows how long. I mean, you can see the snow on the ground where the car was found in that kind of weather with the door wide open and killing the mother at best a quarter of a mile away. Would that go into aggravating circumstances at trial?
Well, it can be used both ways, Nancy. Of course, it's aggravating whenever you put a baby at risk. This person could have been a killer and then made a call to police. But, he could also say, I didn't kill the baby. I left the baby safe. Spare my life.
What about Alan?
100% aggravating. This baby's life was in danger.